Did you know that the Roman Emperor Caligula was more twisted than history books reveal? Let's discover the 9 horrifying truths about his psychopathic reign. Number 1. He was probably a psychopath. In the ancient halls of Rome, a young emperor named Caligula ruled with a dark shadow hanging over him. His behavior left many wondering if he was something far more sinister than just a leader. Caligula was different, and not in a good way. He lacked something most people have: empathy. When others suffered, he didn't seem to care. He did terrible things without feeling sorry, and that made people afraid. He was impulsive, like a child who acts without thinking. His actions were unpredictable and often hurtful. He thought of himself as the most important person in the world. Everything had to be about him. Imagine having a ruler who didn't care if you were sad, who did whatever he wanted without thinking about how it would affect you, and who believed he was more important than anyone else. That's what it was like when Caligula ruled. Number 2. He was incestuous. Caligula's personal life was as disturbing as his rule. He did something that even the ancient Romans found horrifying. He engaged in incestuous relationships. He had 2 sisters, Agrippina the younger and Drusilla, and he didn't hesitate to cross the boundaries of morality with both of them. The most shocking part: he married his sister Drusilla. This marriage, though, didn't last long. It was annulled after her death, but the fact that he'd wed his own sister remained a chilling mark on his reputation. In ancient Rome, marriage between siblings was not only taboo, but also illegal, a grave offense against societal norms. Caligula's actions went far beyond the acceptable boundaries of behavior, even in the ruthless and decadent world of Roman politics. Number 3. He was cruel and sadistic. Caligula's cruelty knew no bounds. He took pleasure in causing pain and suffering, using it as a tool to amuse himself and punish his enemies. It's said that he forced people to endure the horrifying spectacle of their own loved ones being executed, a torment that would haunt anyone's nightmares. But his cruelty didn't stop there. Caligula had a strange appetite for bloodlust, often dining while watching gladiatorial contests, relishing the brutal combat and the inevitable deaths that followed. It was as if he fed off the misery of others. His sadistic nature extended to those who dared to cross him. He had a long list of victims, and even the slightest suspicion of disloyalty led to swift and merciless punishment. There was no fair trial. Instead, it was a one-way ticket to agony and death. Number 4. He was extravagant and wasteful. Caligula had a knack for squandering money like it was going out of style. Imagine having a friend who just can't resist buying fancy clothes, throwing wild parties, and going on luxury vacations, even when they can't afford it. Well, Caligula was a lot like that, but on a much grander scale. He threw lavish banquets that put even the fanciest modern-day feasts to shame. Picture this: golden plates, exotic dishes, and wine flowing like a river. He didn't stop at just one extravagant party. There were plenty of them, but it wasn't just the parties. Caligula had a thing for massive, show-off public projects too. One of his most notorious ideas was a floating bridge across the Bay of Baiae. It wasn't practical at all, and it cost a fortune. People scratched their heads, wondering why on earth he'd waste so much money on something that would barely work. Number 5. He was a religious fanatic. He believed he was more than just a Roman emperor. He thought he was a god. This wasn't just an ego trip. It was a dangerous obsession. He wanted everyone to worship him like they worshiped the gods. To make this happen, Caligula ordered the construction of temples in his own honor. These weren't small, humble places of worship. They were grand and extravagant. He demanded that people bow down before him and offer sacrifices, even their own children, to show their loyalty. Imagine living in a time where you had to treat your ruler like a god, or else you'd face terrible consequences. Caligula's religious fanaticism didn't just stop at demanding worship. It reached into every aspect of Roman life. This was a man who had lost touch with reality, believing himself to be divine. Number 6. He was paranoid and delusional. Caligula was plagued by relentless fears of assassination, convinced that shadows concealed his would-be assassins and every whisper held the seeds of conspiracy. Caligula's paranoia knew no bounds. Often he acted upon his suspicions, condemning innocent people to death. Even those he once trusted weren't safe from his erratic judgments. His reign was a time of terror, as anyone could fall victim to his paranoia. But it wasn't just his paranoia that set him apart. Caligula had a peculiar habit of talking to himself, sometimes holding conversations with invisible beings. His delusions led him to believe he was divine, a god walking among mortals. Such beliefs only fueled his cruelty as he saw himself as above the laws of men. If you're enjoying this video this far, crush that subscribe button and destroy the like button for me. Now, back to the video. Number 7. He was a tyrant. Caligula, the Roman emperor, wasn't known for his fairness or tolerance. In fact, he ruled with an iron fist. Imagine a leader who couldn't stand anyone questioning him. That was Caligula. He had a wicked sense of humor, and if you dared to make a joke about him, it might cost you your life. That's right, he'd have you executed, just for a laugh. He didn't stop there, though. Caligula thought that a group of senators was plotting against him, and without any real evidence, he had them killed too. His tyranny went even further. He demanded to be treated like a god, which is not something a humble leader would do. He insisted that people worship him, building temples in his honor. And to show his power, he forced people to sacrifice their own children to him. Imagine the fear and dread that hung over the Roman Empire during his rule. Number 8. He was incompetent. Caligula, known for his cruelty and extravagance, also proved to be quite inept as a leader. Picture this. Rome was like a grand ship, and Caligula was at the helm, but he lacked the skill to steer it safely. One of his most absurd decisions was to appoint his horse, Incitatus, as a consul. A consul was one of Rome's highest-ranking officials, and Caligula thought his horse would do a better job than some of his human rivals. This bizarre choice left many scratching their heads and questioning his judgment. Caligula's military blunders were equally disastrous. He decided to invade Britain, but ended up retreating without achieving much. His soldiers must have wondered why they were following such an ineffectual leader into battle. And finally, number 9, he was unpopular with the people. Caligula, the ruler of Rome, should have been loved, but he wasn't. Instead, he was despised. The Roman people couldn't stand him. They weren't just a little unhappy, they were furious. Imagine having a leader who didn't care about your well-being. That was Caligula. He didn't listen to the people. He did whatever he pleased, even if it hurt them. His cruelty was legendary. He took pleasure in making others suffer. He spent Rome's money recklessly on his lavish parties and pointless projects, while ordinary citizens struggled to make ends meet. People lived in fear under his rule. If you said anything negative about him, you risked your life. He saw enemies everywhere and got rid of them, whether they were guilty or not. Even worse, Caligula demanded that people worship him as a god. He forced them to make sacrifices to him, and that's something no one wanted to do. Imagine bowing down to a man who showed no compassion, no kindness. In the end, Caligula's reign was a dark time for Rome. The people breathed a sigh of relief when it was finally over, and they could only hope for a better leader to emerge from the shadows of his oppressive rule. And that's it. If you enjoyed this video, then here is another banger for you. Click the video on the screen right now and take a look. And as always, thanks for watching.